But I never said that out loud, by the way.
Okay, I'm going to start recording and then let the people in. Hold on. I'm going to admit all.
He's one of my panelists. 2, 3. I see them there.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Technology and Innovation Satellite Session. I hope you all had an inspiring day at the Planetary Health Annual Meeting so far. My name is Andre Uhl. I am the Planetary Health Alliance's Technology and Innovation Fellow. And in today's panel, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the important work advanced by my colleagues at the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the IEEE. IEEE, for those of you who are not familiar with this organization, is the world's largest technical professional organization dedicated to advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. And it inspires a global community of over 400,000 members in over 160 countries, more than 60% of whom are from outside the United States. And amongst others, the IEEE is a leading developer of industry standards in a broad range of technologies that drive the functionality, capabilities, and interoperability of products and services that transform how people live, work, and communicate. Today's panel is curated and moderated by the Director of Emerging Communities and Opportunities Development at the IEEE Standards Association, Maria Palombini. Maria leads the IEEE's Healthcare and Life Sciences practice, a global platform of excellence that is bringing together committed volunteer stakeholders to evaluate, validate, and develop solutions for establishing trust in new technology applications that will afford the right to safety, security, and protection of life. For today's session, Maria has invited 3 distinguished guest speakers to lead a conversation on the pragmatic impact of disruptive technologies and applications for food and farmer sustainability. Dear Maria, dear panelists, thank you so much for joining us and introducing some of your path-breaking projects to our community. Maria, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Andre, for the warm welcome. And thank you, all of you, for joining us today. So as Andre mentioned, I obviously with the IEEE, I lead the healthcare and life sciences practice. And Andre took a little bit of our thunder in sharing with you some of the work we do here at the IEEE SA. We will make the presentation available for download to everybody, so I don't want to waste too much time going over our organization because it has such a deep roots in the technology discipline, and we are global. So I want to get a little bit to just about the healthcare and life sciences and how it ties into our mission of advancing technology for humanity. So at the healthcare and life science practice, we really incubate great ideas from global volunteers. And 3 of our panelists today are volunteering to speak on this panel, but as well, when you hear what they're talking about, they're really talking about how do we take disruptive technologies and apply them to global challenges. And from a healthcare life science practice, besides being able to give access and quality care to all through these technologies, that's our goal, we also need the sustainability of good nutrition. Without nutrition, we can't have good health. And so naturally, this is how we interpret how we can work with volunteers in sustaining our mission and advancing technology for humanity. So if you're interested, I have included how we can get part of the healthcare life science practice. You know, Andre mentioned our mission. And so today we're going to get to obviously the agriculture side of the work we do on life sciences. One of our guiding objectives in our global mission is how do we enable enhanced access to proper nutrition globally? And in that work that sits in 1/3 of our branches in our work streams called global wellness. Global wellness is the arm of the practice that really looks at the most dynamic impact on our overall healthcare, meaning, you know, opportunities opportunities around pandemics, mental wellness, climate impact on food security and food sustainability. So this work today and this discussion today is core to what we are doing. And our goal is to hopefully inspire you to want to participate and collaborate with our global volunteers in helping to develop solutions in the form of technical standards, performance assessment projects, or just overall working together to put out an important paper on assessments and gaps or anything that really needs to help move the needle in addressing the challenge. So currently at the IEEE SA, we do have standards projects in progress addressing the issue of food sustainability and food security. So we want this list to grow more and more broad and obviously more in depth. We do work in P4005 in true IEEE language. We're looking at standard protocol and scheme for measuring soil spectroscopy, naturally an important element of looking at literally at the ground. We also have blockchain, looking at food security from the source through the consumption. We have 27961, which looks at the Internet of Food Systems. So these are specifically looking at areas of food delivery, food production, food supply chain. We're looking at the entire value chain of food source. So with that, I just want to introduce you to our exciting panelists. Let me just say, I'd rather go from here. Obviously, I'm your moderator, I'm your host today and for this session, but with me, I have Naeem Zafar, who's co-founder and CEO of Telesense, and he's also a professor at UC Berkeley. We have Zach Din, who is founder and CEO of Seaward, a startup in the aquaculture space. And finally, we have Sauron Schroeder, who I believe of our panelists, he's an independent advisor with a diverse global experience on the flip side, right? On the usage of tools and understanding of actual agri-companies. He's a former CEO of Bunge, which is a multinational agri-food company in soybean exports, grain production, and things of that nature. And he also now sits as well working and helping startups to sort of bring their technologies to the domain. So with that, I'm going to allow each of them to tell you a little bit about their work, what inspires them, and some of the exciting case studies and opportunities they've been a part of. So that, I'd like to turn it over first to Naeem.
Sure. So yeah, Naeem Zafar, and we are focused on post-harvest grain. So once you harvest grain, it never improves in quality. It just goes downhill. Question is, depending on the weather, environmental condition, the temperature, the moisture, the pest, how was it stored, makes all the difference. In some places, you can lose up to 36% of the grain in some countries. Africa in general is 22% loss, Brazil 14%. So it changes quite a bit. As you know, the grain world population in the next 30 years is going from 7.2 billion to 9.1 billion. You also know that land where we are growing food and crops especially is not growing up 28%. Something got to give. That's where we come in. By using advanced technology, wireless sensors, a little bit of machine learning, we can begin to create insights for growers, people in grain industry everywhere, that can make smarter decisions and preserve what they already have grown, and how to not just preserve it, but right now, a lot of blending happens when a lot of crud gets blended in with good stuff just to make the specs. That's why there's so much more cases of people with food allergies and whatnot. So all that could be reduced and better food supply could be created if you applied advanced technology to grain production, grain logistics, grain transport. So agriculture is the largest market and largest industry in the world. We are highly focused on the post-harvest grain storage and transportation. Happy to talk more later, but back to Maria.
Thank you, Naeem. So going from the ground to the sea, I'd like to ask Zach Din to talk a little bit about the work, his area of research and the work he's doing at Seaward.
Hi, Maria. Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here. Yeah, so as founder of Seaward, our mission here is to advance the sustainability of farm seafood. And the way we do this is through global satellite observation of aquaculture activity. And the reason behind why we're so focused on this area is because today more than half the world's seafood is farmed. It's actually not fished anymore. And a lot of this, most of this activity is being done by smallholder farms throughout Southeast Asia and in the Americas and Africa. And the big issue around this is in the Western world, there's a very strong negative connotation around farmed seafood still, even after many decades of the industry trying to improve its messaging. And the way the industry has been doing this is through market-based certification programs. You'll sometimes see labels on seafood that says ASC or BAP certified. They're these big standards around the world. The problem with this system is that they really only focus on the large farms because these audits have to be done in person and they're only being done once a year. So this does raise a lot of questions to consumers about, are these labels really working? And after 10 years of operation, these certifications have only captured a few thousand farms around the world when there are over 1.5 million farms around the world. And so what we're doing is we're trying to scale the ability for certification programs to actually reach smallholder farms all around the world using remotely assessed audits that are able to help the farmer prove to the world that they're farming sustainably. And at the same time, we can provide this data back to the farmers so they can actually make better management decisions and actually make sustainable improvements like at the farm level. And I'll pause there.
Thank you, Zach. And finally, we have Sauron Schroeder, who I think brings the most holistic and global view on his experiences in the agriculture industry. Sauron?
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. The topic is so big, it's hard to figure out really where to start. But anyways, my perspective is probably from sort of the inside of the traditional industry. I spent 35 years until I retired 2 years ago in the global ag food trading, processing, shipping, risk management business. Essentially, everything that is involved in buying grain from farmers, be it in the backlands of Brazil or the Ukraine, or of course in the US and Europe, shipping it to the ports, processing it, and shipping it across the oceans to wherever demand was for, whether it was protein, oil, or grain for milling. A massive global enterprise. Started out with a company called Continental, spent some time with the largest company in the industry today, Cargill, and finished up with 20 years at Bunge, also a global leading company in the agri-food space, as the group CEO for 6 years. So I've seen a little bit of everything, but I can tell you that the pace at which new ideas, innovation, technology is coming at us across the full value chain, from the farm to the table, so to speak, in the agri-food industry, the last 10 years is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's as if the industry was asleep for, let's say, for the first 25 years of my career. Not much happened other than the markets went up and down a lot. But in terms of new technology, new ways of doing things, I guess you can say GMO seeds was a novel thing, but in reality, not much changed. Certainly, if you compare it to the healthcare industry or other technologies, we were not a very innovative industry in general. But the last 10 years, that's all changed. And Naeem and Zach, of course, are in the middle of all this now, and it's fascinating to see how all this, not only capital but new ideas, are being unleashed. And it is not necessarily coming from inside of the big traditional companies. I really feel that a lot of the innovation that's coming into our industry across the board is coming from entrepreneurs like the ones on the panel here, who have great ideas and are willing to take some risk and find partners with capital who are willing to help them along and eventually make significant impact on the agri-food ecosystem. And that's what I'm spending my time on now, the last couple of years. I'm an investor, I'm an advisor, I sit on some boards. I'm on Naeem's board at Telesense, and try to help guide some of these new companies to, let's say, how it all works inside of the existing system, prevent mistakes if they can be avoided, but also introduce. Because I do feel that the big challenge with all this new innovation that's coming at us and the traditional industry is how do you create the links? how do you make things work together? It's not as if one will replace another. So I think disruption has become a popular word. It's a good word, but it's also a bit of a negative word in the sense that sometimes it sort of takes on the meaning of it is either me or you. I think in many cases, real good, successful innovation is actually when you find the marriage of something that was traditional with something that's new. And so, finding ways to introduce new ideas into the traditional system where it's possible can really help accelerate growth. And so I've been involved in all kinds of things, from computational seed development for indoor ag, with Naeem in quality censoring, novel products, creating rubber out of dandelions, data analytics and artificial intelligence around supply and demand, market prediction, all that kind of stuff. That all has its place in our industry. And I could go on, but I guess my perspective is really to try and help channel technology in a way that will make it, succeed faster with lesser risk. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. So it's interesting you mentioned the disruption comment. When I first started talking about blockchain applications in the supply chain, we're like, this is great disruptive technology we're going to disrupt your supply chain. And supply chain directors are like, please never use that term together with the term supply chain. We don't like disruptions in supply chain. So it's always knowing who your audience is when you say certain things sometimes, understood. Okay, great. So I'd like to let the audience know that we will have a portion of time dedicated for your questions for our panelists. I want you to really think about some ideas. Our goal in this panel in particular, why we put the team together here, is it's not only talking about these quote unquote disruptive technologies and new ideas into the domain, but as well as how do we make them accessible and utilitarian to smaller farmers and the larger farm operations at large. We don't want to lose sight that smaller farmers are vulnerable, right? They live in rural communities. They're sometimes impoverished themselves. They don't have access to infrastructure. There's a lot of challenges there. And we're going to talk about this in some of our questions that we've already prepared for the panel. But I want all of you out there to think about these kinds of things as well as we go through this. So I would like to, sorry, let me go back 1 second. My first question for the panel, I'm going to ask each panelist to answer individually. So one of the first questions I start with is, how are these technologies, disruptive, new applications, really cool things, whatever we want to call them, accessible and as well as utilitarian to smaller farmers and even larger operational farms who are looking to sustain their yield productivity, their outputs, or looking into expanding, but always working with what they have. So I'll start with you first, Naeem, from that point of view.
So let's look at the big picture. What has happened in the last 25 years is quite amazing. Because when you were starting a company in 1990s or doing anything, the first few $1 million went to buying the infrastructure, the servers, whatever. Because of cloud computing, because of these platforms, you can start a company with $100 a month through AWS. You can create value sitting in New Zealand, South Island. The technology has even the playing field. You don't have to be in a particular location, have access to millions of dollars to create value. Because any farmer who has a smartphone is able to access data. What you need is smart software to make sense out of data and inexpensive way to collect data. So if you can do that, and that's exactly our mission. And we're seeing that not just us, Telesense doing that, we're seeing other people doing that. So, talk about simplicity. What I'm holding in my hand is a spear. It has multiple sensors in the shaft. All the electronic cellular communication is in the bulb. You stick it into a pile of grain and you're getting data. You literally, your installation instructions are insert in grain, walk away, 2 lines. So when you get down to that idiot-proof simplicity and make sense of the data coming in, is there a spoilage? Is my CO2 level rising? Is the temperature stable? Is there any variation? Is there any anomalies? What does that mean? A farmer does not want to deal with a lot of complexity. What he does want to deal with, get a text message which says, turn on the fan on bin number 17 for 8 hours starting at midnight. He can deal with that. That's the level of simplicity which democratizes the data. If you knew your grain was in pretty good quality, you won't be fooled by somebody who says, hey, I'm going to give you $1.50. Do you want to sell it? Or nobody's going to ever walk in here. You have knowledge. So giving people data allows them to be powerful, allows them to make smart decisions and eke out the extra few cents of profit per bushel. That's the fundamental mission. That's my mission. And I think that's exactly to the point you're raising. This technology is very much helpful to average farmer in any country. It's not just for the privileged few.
Very important. And I think that's an important element of, one of the concerns is we have these great technologies, as, Sauron started to talk about, but for some farmers, it could be overwhelming. Like, can I really do this? And so now I turn it over to Zach, because when he was telling me about all the cool stuff they're doing with machine learning, and, from that point of view, I was saying, how would a small farmer use this? And so Zach, now I pass the question over to you. In the technologies that you're working with and the data insights, how is it accessible to the smaller farmers, and how do you think it's going to help them sustain their operations?
Yeah, of course. And I think one of the challenges we have when we describe our solution to potential customers is satellite information, space technology. How do we make sense of that type of information? Sounds very advanced. The thing is, we've been using satellites to predict the weather, and so if you turn on the radio or look on the internet, you'll have a weather report right there. That's space technology in action every single day. And so what we're simply trying to do is take that same satellite observation capability and then transform it into a data product that is useful for the farmers in the aquaculture space. And so if I can paint the picture of what aquaculture looks like in many of these places, is you can think of the Mekong Delta, low-lying flatlands in Vietnam, where traditionally a lot of this low-lying area was used for rice farming, but due to increases in salinity, a lot of this because of sea level rise driven by climate change, farmers are starting to transition to aquatic species because the salinity is changing so much in these areas. And so the way farmers in these areas get information and get farm support is through outside technicians. So you can imagine a family-sized farm, and there's many of them throughout the area. The feed suppliers and the input suppliers, the ones that are selling probiotics, the ones that are selling the juvenile farm products to the farmers, they all have a vested interest in making sure the farmers take their supplies and do well. Because if a farmer consecutively takes their product and isn't doing well, they're losing money because they're providing their inputs on credit. So these large companies send technicians to these farms, and depending on the size of the farm, they could be going every day or maybe once every other week. And the problem that we're trying to solve right now is what we call technician optimization. So these technicians are well paid, they have veterinary degrees or marine biology degrees, and they get paid quite a lot of money to make these visits. And so if we're able to help them understand which farms they need to go to actually make a large impact and make a difference, and skip out on visits that are typically a waste, could be a waste of effort and time, we can save these companies a lot of money and be able to really extend the ability to provide technical services to these regions. Because right now, the ratio of technicians to farmers in rural areas can reach 1,000 to 1. And so you can imagine one technician trying to service 1,000 farms, it's just not going to work. And for us, what we do even further is we're able to submit all this information to the farmer, and they're able to, using a simple app, they're able to just communicate directly by sending an automated chat message. They can just text us hello, and they can immediately, they can send us more information so we can provide further calibration of their data. And then we can provide them insights on disease risk around the area, which, because of aquaculture being very strongly related to hydrology, if a farmer upstream is having a disease issue, it will transmit down into their farm. So we're able to, at large scales, really see when disease is happening at a region scale, and be able to warn farmers that they should probably empty out their ponds now and take out their harvest and save what they can before the disease comes in, affects their operations there. So
fascinating.
What we're working on.
Fascinating opportunity. And Sauron, you kind of started to touch on this a little bit in your introduction, but your perspective on the accessibility and utilitarian of these types of tools in farm operations.
Well, again, it's a big question and there's no simple answer. I think you can sort of bucket it maybe in sort of two buckets. If you take farming in North America, most of South America, Europe and Eastern Europe, I would say technology flows very fast, very quickly, and is available, almost instantaneously, everywhere. Having spent a lot of time in Brazil, which, 20, 30 years ago was not the powerhouse that it is today, but for technology, you'd be amazed. I mean, whatever you find on a super farm in Iowa, you will see in Mato Grosso, the next day or maybe even before. So I think, larger size farming units in these more developed agricultural markets, technology flows very fast. But even in those markets, it's a challenge for farmers to choose what's most important. There's so much being thrown at them. And not every farmer, even if it is a big commercial operation, is a data scientist and a microbiologist and et cetera, all at the same time. They have to cover so many disciplines in technology to sift through what's being thrown at them by people who want to sell them the latest new idea. Mm-hmm. I think there are advisory services out now that basically help filter this so that you can deal with it. And I think that is actually a business opportunity onto itself. So technology flows fast, but it's a tough choice for many farmers what to pick. Certainly what I think both Zach and Naeem pointed out was that the simpler the application, the easier the adaptation. There's no doubt. And in the case of telesense, it's pretty obvious. I think the real challenge is in what you'd call subsistence farming. I think you mentioned that in your intro. And broadly speaking, you're probably talking large parts of Africa and probably India as the places where you're talking about farm units that are maybe a fraction of an acre or a hectare, with no real infrastructure. And how do you bring technology to those people? And that, I think, is a much bigger challenge, but one that if there's a way to do it, you would solve a lot of problems at the same time. One, subsistence farming could become actually more than subsistence. You would perhaps find, I would say, two big buckets of opportunity. One is waste elimination, and the other one is productivity. In these sort of more subsistence type farming operations, it's not uncommon in many of these places where there isn't enough food that 40% of the crop is wasted from the point of harvest to the point that it's consumed. And it's wasted partly because it goes out of condition, partly because there's no infrastructure to store it, partly because there's no logistics to bring it from point A to point B, and also because sometimes there's no market. There's no bid for the crop that's being grown. And in all the places where agriculture has expanded fast, take again Brazil or take Ukraine. Ukraine is a powerhouse now. It has grown and exploded in significance on the world scene. It wasn't like that 20 years ago. Well, it's because markets have been, good markets have been present. Infrastructure has been there to translate price signals straight to the farmer. And there has been, I would say, kind of a code around trade so that the farmer could rely on the system to offtake the grain and pay on time and not cheat and all that stuff. So there are a lot of things that are missing in some of these subsistence markets that prevent technology from gaining access, but in general also just hinders farmers in making a living. And a lot of it, unfortunately, has little to do with technology and more to do with politics and the rule of law and all these types of things. And I think it's more about maybe creating, business models, whether it's, introducing cooperative models in certain markets where, farmers in a village can share technology, where you create local kind of heroes, entrepreneurs, people who help make a local market work, who are recognized for that, who can work as an extension of larger, even multinational companies. But I think it is much more of a regional type of effort that will get these markets, and they're massive when you think about the number of people that we're talking about here, get them to work. It's less about, I think it's less about technology, frankly. It's more about just the basics of sort of, rule of law, rule of market, and transparency, and finding ways for farmers to collaborate. And cooperatives, and I'm not a proponent of cooperatives everywhere, but I do know that they served purposes, really important purposes, in many parts of the world over periods of time. When farmers were weak, when they didn't have bargaining power, when they didn't have access to finance, when they were left to themselves, so to speak, and finding ways for them to work together, allowed technology transfer, allowed financing to be available, allowed infrastructure that could be shared to be built. So I think as much as this is a question around technology, it's really as much a question around market modeling and how you build sort of the social economic infrastructure for all this stuff to work.
Absolutely. And I totally agree. I think it's not just about the technology and the solutions they can offer, it's how they can be accepted and adopted and understood. And I do know from working with certain other projects in other domains that the farmers cooperatives offer this element of trust. For certain farmers, if the cooperative, they're working with them and they have trust in them, if they advocate for piloting or testing something, farmers may be more open to it. But again, that's just, we can't just do and apply all in every sector of the world and in every opportunity. So with that, I'd like to go to our next question. And I'm going to start with, Sauron on this one, because when we had our first conversation, he just blew me away with this one answer, and I'm sure he's going to say it again. So in the use of these technologies, we want farmers to continue to get better yields out of existing land, because as Naeem told me, he goes, this is the land, you can't just keep growing and making more of it. So how do we get better yields out of it, right? But at the same time, in utilizing this land, we want to be also to be able to protect our planet. And so how do we reduce less greenhouse emissions or spoilage or anything of that nature that can have less impact on the planet? So Sauron, I'm going to start with you on this question.
Okay. I don't remember what I said about this when we talked, but
it was about food spoilage. You told me that amazing statistic.
Hopefully I'll get there. Well, I mean, it is. I think it's, again, in general terms, food waste is a massive problem globally. In our more privileged world, 30 to 40% of food is wasted more or less at the point of consumption. Whether it's restaurant waste or food waste in the house, we throw out, I wouldn't say as much as we eat, but it's pretty close, and it's not very nice when you think about it. At the other spectrum, subsistence farming economies, as much goes to waste at the point of production, whether it is left in the field rotting or whether it spoils during primitive storage, does not have, let's say, the luxury of the technology that Naeem is producing to monitor and so forth. I mean, there are many things that go into this, but in those economies, it's really at the point of production. Imagine if we could just cut that in half. That would be the same as essentially producing 20% more of everything at once. In China, it is a government priority. I mean, it is stated as part of the certainly within the agricultural sector as a national imperative to eliminate food waste. And of course, it should be in a country that is so dependent on imports. So I think that is clearly a big deal. And there are many ways to do that. And Naeem has, well, I mean, in fact, Zach, it's the same in if I understand your technology correctly. If you can forewarn a fish farmer someplace that there may be a disease outbreak, and that he or she can act upon it before it hits them, you may have saved the harvest. So it's not just in grain; it's across everything. Whether it's poultry or pork production, flu and disease outbreaks, you can prevent them from having the impact that it has because you stop it before it becomes big. That's a big deal. But I think at the very basic level, it's about creating the type of infrastructure, basic logistics infrastructure that is needed to, offtake the grain at harvest, store it in a good way so that it can be consumed, over the subsequent, whatever, 10 to 12 months until the next harvest comes in. And there's a lot of very basic, technology or proven logistics infrastructure that can help with that. You don't need drones for that. I'm sure it can help, but that's not the point. There's a lot of basic tackling that could at least in those subsistence economies help eliminate food waste. And I think in the Western world it's a mindset change. I think it is upon us, actually. I think people are much more aware of food waste today than they were even 5 years ago. So maybe if you work on both ends of that spectrum, it will have a global impact. And all of that, of course, helps with sustainability. If we can produce 20% more by cutting waste in half, you have produced 20% more without emitting a single ton of CO2 more than you did before, right? Wow. So that's a big movement forward. I think there are also there are a lot of farming techniques, and I'm talking now basically row crop, not aquaculture, but farming techniques that we call them regenerative here because it's a cool word. It's a cool word. Everybody likes it. It's almost like organic. It means good. It means good, I guess, in a way. But if you think about regenerative farming practices, where the objective really is to create soil health, to not take away from the soil, not deplete the soil, but bring to the soil by choosing the right types of crops in rotation, cover crops, so that the land is never idle, preventing things like plowing or tilling the land. That has been a common practice globally, that you can't grow anything unless you turn the soil every year. That releases all the carbon. That is not a good practice. And more farmers in the US and in South America and in the Ukraine have adopted what's called no-till farming techniques, where you basically don't turn the land, but allow the carbon to sequester. And you measure soil health in all kinds of ways. So I think there could, again, you need a local change agent. You need a local community that can, somebody to lead the way, again, whether it's a cooperative or whether a local entrepreneur who can teach some of these techniques. And frankly, these are not new techniques. I mean, some of these regenerative farming methods go back hundreds of years, but were forgotten or were inconvenient as mass production agriculture took over in the years following the Second World War. But the regenerative farming techniques have been known for hundreds of years, and they do work. And so I think there probably are some fairly simple things that can be taught or done that would, if you combine, the point I made about limiting waste with some, better farming techniques that don't compromise yield, but may require a different way of farming and maybe some slightly different crops in rotation, that you could work on this problem of sustainability from both sides. Right. And anyways, that probably took more than my time, but there are solutions to this. I am absolutely convinced. I have never been more optimistic, frankly, about solving for this than I am today.
Excellent. We love optimism. So now I'm going to turn to the technology guys, right? So naturally, farmers are looking to survive. Their focus is on obviously production, maybe not so worried about the planet. Then everybody's like, well, the technology's got to pick up the ball and run with it, right? So let's start with Zach. Zach, where do you think in the work you're doing, you make this almost seamless from a point of view that the farmers have to worry about it, but we're addressing it at that point in aquaculture?
Yeah, of course. So when I talk about aquaculture with Seaward, and we're primarily focused on shrimp farming. And shrimp is the #1 seafood consumed in the U.S. and in places like Vietnam and like Thailand. Like shrimp is like the dominant form of being produced like in ponds in areas that were once formerly mangrove habitat. And so the first generation of shrimp farms were basically built in mangrove forests, and unfortunately mangroves were cut down in order to like put these farms in place. And mangroves and other like types of blue carbon is one of the most like powerful forms of carbon storage in the world. Like, and so the trend now, and this is a mission that's a message that's being supported by all of the large NGOs, like the World Wildlife Fund, Conservation International. They all have programs about what they call controlled intensification. And so why does the idea of intensifying farming production make sense in terms of sustainability? There's a couple of reasons behind this. The main reason is that as you can intensify how much shrimp you can grow per area, you actually reduce the amount of area that you actually need to produce the same amount of shrimp. And so the mission around this is that a farm, like if you can get a farm to invest in technologies like different pumps and management software and more advanced equipment, you can shrink the farm size drastically and still produce a large amount of yield. And at the same time, the amount of water interaction, the amount of water exchange between the natural environment and the farm is much more controlled. And so even if there's some sort of issue around disease or pollution on a specific farm site, that water is much more contained and treated before it ever is released into the environment, if at all. And so all of these NGOs are basically saying that in order for intensification to occur at scale in developing areas, the #1 issue is the lack of money. And so, and the lack of investment into small farms and helping them transition is the lack of data. And so that's where we come in terms of the studies have showed that farms that are able to meet certification program standards, they are likely the farms that are going to be the most successful in actually taking in an investment and actually turning it into a successful like return on investment. And so that's really what we're trying to do in terms of providing like a data system to verify the production of smallholder farms. And the way we kind of think about this is satellite data goes back many years into the past. And what we can do is we can actually observe and verify production for several years like prior to present day. And we can actually help farmers build a credit report to basically say, this is how this farm has been producing. This is how many times we've seen a potential for a crop failure at this farm. And if these results are optimal, and we can share these results to the right impact investors, and we can actually we can help these investors make more successful deployment of loans to these farms. And at the same time, you can actually put in requirements into these loans where they actually have to replant mangroves back into the remaining areas of their land. And there's a requirement that only a certain amount of land can ever be used for production, and the rest has to be restored for mangrove habitat. And another point that different like mangrove restoration groups have pointed out is that in some situations, the hydrology in these locations can't actually support mangrove forests anymore because the land has subsided too far for proper like water exchange to happen. This is another potential for actually to install photovoltaic power into these regions, because something farmers have cited a lot in these regions is that the lack of reliable power is a critical part of production. And right now, farmers are heavily using diesel generators to power pumps and aeration devices. And so by using our satellite technology to do suitability analysis, we're able to actually identify the best places to put in either mangroves or solar panels, like to really help in this effort here.
Thank you, Zach. And you, Naeem.
Sorry, did you call on me?
Yes.
Okay. There's a guy cutting a tree outside my house.
That's not good for sustainability.
Yeah. But I'm sure you want to go to the audience questions, so I'll be very brief. Let's take a simple example where technology can help. So I was talking to one of our customers, Telesyn's customer in South Dakota. They have a pre-piled 2 to 3 million bushel leaf. His electric bill to run the fans to keep the tarp down was $60,000 a month. So if there were smart technology, we can figure out when to turn the fans on, when to turn half the fans off. If there's no high winds outside, you don't need to turn the fans on. That's a huge savings. The point is that savings in electricity and sustainability could be much easily accomplished with few sensors. I'll stop here because the noise may be bothering you guys. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Naeem. And so we do have some other stock questions, but we're already getting some great questions through the chat, and I want to remind the audience to please continue to submit them. You can address them to all the panelists or one specific panelist. So Zach, there's one question for you. It says, yes, intensification diminishes deforestation. However, doesn't intensification contribute to zoonotic spillover like SARS, H1N1, and or COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, within aquaculture and shrimp, like these aren't the I guess like the diseases that are prevalent in this space, but generally speaking, yes, there's several types of diseases that affect shrimp, like white spot and then EMS, which is early mortality syndrome. And so like these diseases are typically like able to be addressed if they are like discovered early. And to like isolate the problem, and mainly like the way like you prevent community spread of aquaculture diseases is going to be better biosecurity of one, like personnel transferring in between farms, and this is something that we are trying to minimize through like technician optimization, and then water exchange into the natural environment. And so the more controlled intensification can happen on farms, then the water is actually treated before it's ever released into the environment, if at all. And the notion of being able to provide mangrove habitat like within a farm boundary provides opportunity to actually use a natural water filtration through the mangrove as like a treatment system.
Got it. Sauron, so there's a question for you. It says, when you talk about the rule of law hindering farmers, how do you suggest that law should act or not act? Or should politics be less dominant and bureaucratic? Or do you rather hope for a change in politics that drives and pushes technological innovation? I'm so thankful that question went to you, not to me.
I guess I set myself up for that one. But what I meant by that really was, in my experience at least, in countries and in markets where there has been, where actors, whether it was a farmer on one side and a commercial company on the other, interacted with each other in a way which, contracts and commitments were delivered, and if they weren't, there was a legal mechanism for dealing with it. At the same time as any other provider in the system, whether it was a logistics provider or a public port, I mean, all the pieces of the machinery that is needed to complete the value chain adhere to the same sort of legal standard, and that there was recourse to the farmer if he was not treated right, if he was given bad seed, or somebody stole his grain, or a local official asking for a contribution to facilitate transport. I mean, you can imagine any number of things that can get in the way of a good, orderly, trusting transaction. But those conditions have been met, agricultural productivity has gone through the roof, and money has flown in. I mean, there has been no limitation, really. It is I don't want to mention specific markets, but I think you can imagine some places in the world where this is not the case, and where the farmer not only has to deal with the uncertainties of being a farmer, wind and weather and bad luck, good luck of a particular crop, but has to fight through a myriad of headwinds that are created by bad governance in general. And that's what I'm talking about. I think that can't just be, I mean, it's nothing that any big company can deal with alone. It is really, it's a country or a society issue where it takes place. But you do know the difference between where things work and where they don't. And I'm not saying that every other place in the world is perfect, You know, farmers are, it's a tough living. It really is, and it's a tough living even in the most affluent and law-abiding countries in the world. But you know, imagine some of these places where the farmers not only have to deal with all the inherent risk in being a farmer, but also, you know, having basically everything else stacked against them. It's almost impossible, and that's why they never get anywhere. And so, you know, how you solve that, that will take another session, I'm sure. I'm not a politician, but I do know what difference it makes when it works.
Absolutely. And thank you, Sauron. So I just want to remind everybody, we still have a few more minutes. If you have some questions, please get them into the chat. So Naeem, I'm going to push this question to you. It's being an IEEE staff member, of course, I'm going to come out with a different bias in how I answer this. And I think you as a longtime volunteer and member of the organization will come with a different perspective. So the question is, how can IEEE focus the talent and commitment of its community to addressing the technical challenges around planetary health? In other words, how do you identify these technical obstacles to living with a reduced ecological footprint and then bring your community into service of addressing those obstacles?
The simple one-word answer is standard. Because the way this thing will work is that different sensors, different software, different systems talking to each other. And nothing is more important than existence of standard. And IEEE has a long history of defining the standards. You probably can give a list of from USB standard to Wi-Fi to Bluetooth. These are all IEEE. Thank you very much. So this is the point, is it's not happening on the farm level. All these people are trying different things. They don't talk to each other. And the future of our next 10 years, if you can remember only one word, if you're looking for a job, APIs will eat the world. So if you can figure out some APIs, some way to interoperate the information. So how do I make decisions? How I have 50 bins of grain. I got an order for 5,000 tons. I'm going to empty 4. Which 4? Well, that requires a bunch of data. What's stored there? What's the quality? What's the quantity? What's the cost of logistics? How many people are working that weekend? When is the ship leaving? I got to pull this all together so I can make a smart decision. APIs, standards. That's IEEE is good at.
Thank you. Made my job easy for today. But, and I do agree with Naeem. I mean, one of the things about standards, it opens the doors for innovation, and it actually mitigates the barriers to access to technologies, regardless if you're a small, you know, less than 1 hectare farmer to one of the world's largest farming operations. You will find, and as you talk, as Naeem pointed out, data is a huge challenge, regardless of the investment and management technology suite you have. And even if you're a small farmer using just your average cell phone. So I think we have one more question for Zach. I think your intensification intensified a lot of conversation, Zach. So it says, one of the questions for you was, while intensifying agriculture like shrimp farming might be environmentally friendly, it does not seem particularly species appropriate. How can this form of intense agriculture be reconciled with a holistic approach of planetary health?
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
This a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's something that I think morally, like, you know, at Seaward, like we've had to contend with. And I think something that we feel very strongly about is the support for smallholders, and acknowledging that, like, they, in a lot of ways, like, they are farming things not out of choice, but out of necessity. They are living in places where they're being affected by climate change with sea level rise and saltwater inundation. And so these were farmers that in many cases were once growing like agricultural crops like rice, and are no longer able to because of growing salinity. And so what we see is a strong movement towards, you know, plant-based proteins and vegetarian and vegan diets. But what we like to tell people is choose the diet that you think is right, but at the same time also consider that a food system that's increasingly pushing towards just agricultural products, it's really leaving out certain types of producers like fishers and aquaculturalists that are producing something in an area that is what their region is optimized for. And so to choose to not support their products is really to choose to not support their livelihoods and their futures. And that's really a mission that we're trying to support, is making sure these smallholders get the support they need, not only in terms of technological solutions, but also in terms of like a branding and messaging that really like speaks for them as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Jack. So we have a couple minutes left. I want to, first of all, thank the panelists for, I feel like I could have had an individual session with each one of them, with probably a workshop with each one of them, with all the knowledge and insight that were able to bring to the table today. So thank you, Naeem, Zach, and Sauron for joining me and being a part of this panel. And I want to thank all of you for your great questions and participating and listening. Like as we mentioned, IEEE is a platform for open collaboration, developing solutions, discussing ideas. As Naeem shared with you, is how do we really come together and drive solutions through building consensus and really responsible use of technology so that we can move the needle in addressing these problems. So, we do a lot of different ways that we talk to our audience globally. Through podcasts, webinars. We were doing face-to-face events before the pandemic. We'll hopefully one day get back to that. We are all over the world and we try to bring this message, but as more importantly, have experts, volunteers, transmit their passion into action. And this is kind of what we do here at IEEE. We give the platform to nurture those ideas. So definitely please tune into any of our activities, learn more information. And if you have any idea for a standard, I invite you to come check out our PAR-a-thon. PAR is an IEEE standards term for project authorization request, and it's how we instantiate a standards project. This is a free session, and it's actually a live lab on how to fill out correctly a PAR and to get into a healthcare life science standard. For those of you who might have been already nurturing this idea, please join us. And finally, we're doing a lot of work on cybersecurity, which we all know is not just a health problem, it's a global problem across every discipline. So if you want to join our workshop series, please feel free to do so. And then if you download the presentation, there's a whole appendix of the different standards we have in this space, all the different incubator programs. I didn't want to bore everybody with all that detail. I'd rather you hear from the experts themselves in this panel. But at any time, I invite all of you to reach out to me if there's anything that you want to learn more about telesense or Seaward and all the work Sauron's doing, or about IEEE SA and the work we're doing there. Our doors are always open and we're always looking for great ideas and great conversation. So with that, thank you again for joining us. We wish you all to continue safe and well, and we hope that this panel was informative to you. And that's it for now. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Andre, for inviting us to be a part of this as well.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Naeem, Zach, Sauron. It was really insightful panel. And I think you showed quite vividly what kinds of conversation need to be held in order really to hold up to IEEE's mission, right? Advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. So thank you with much gratitude. Until soon.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.